Types of research methods. By the end of this session, you should be able to define quantitative and qualitative research, explain what has influenced the development of quantitative and qualitative research, identify differences and similarities between both approaches, identify the types of research designs used as procedures in quantitative, qualitative, or combined mixed research, identify factors useful for deciding whether to use a quantitative, qualitative, or a mixed methods approach in a study. How do we define quantitative research? Well, as you can see in the screen, it's an educational approach in which the researcher decides what to study, asks specific narrow questions, collects quantifiable data from participants, analyzes these numbers using statistics, and conducts the inquiry in an unbiased, objective manner. This is different from qualitative approaches where the researcher relies on the views of participants, asks broad general questions, collects data consisting largely of words or text from participants, describes and analyzes these words by themes, and conducts the inquiry usually in a subjective or what you might refer to as a biased manner. Let's look back at the main question that we began to explore in the first session, the introduction to the research process. And that question was, what are the factors that determine student achievement? What is the development of quantitative research? Historical trends. It began with statistical procedures, correlational procedures, comparison of groups, cause-effect relationships, and then it was followed by test and measurement practices. In the late 19th century, you saw the eruption or the explosion of testing mental abilities, measuring achievement, like the scholastic aptitude test in the United States of America. In Australia, we have what is called the NAPLAN, and predicting achievement from standardized measurements. When we take a look at school type and try to see its relationship with student achievement, we're actually looking at correlational procedures. When we take a look at student achievement and we differentiate this between various races, that is a comparison of groups statistical procedure. If we take a look at teacher factors and find out whether or not they determine student achievement, then we're looking at cause and effect relationships. When we take a look at quantitative research designs, let's continue the historical trends. Educational surveys became the fad in the late 19th century. Simple experiments began in the early 20th century. Multiple groups and tests became a fad until about 1935. Then you saw longitudinal designs. And then several books on research designs were made. Campbell and Stanley, Kurlinger, these were in the early 60s. An emphasis on collecting and analyzing information in the form of numbers is a characteristic of the historical trend of quantitative research. There's also an emphasis on collecting scores that measure distinct attributes of individuals and organizations. And there was an emphasis on the procedures of comparing groups or relating factors about individuals or groups in experiments, correlational studies, and surveys. Now let's take a look at qualitative research. What were the major themes? It's driven by philosophical ideas, procedural developments, and advocacy practices. Let's take a look at these further. Okay? When we take a look at, again, that focal point, what are the factors that determine student achievement? We'll see how it develops later on, right? Naturalistic inquiry or constructivism is one of the big philosophical pillars of qualitative research. Essentially, it looks at the participant's point of view, right? And it describes the participant's view within a setting or a context. And this provided and also provided alternative perspectives to traditional research. When we look at the focal question, what are the factors that determine student achievement? From a qualitative perspective, we could actually rephrase this question by saying or by asking, what does student achievement mean to different types of students? So now we're looking at that question from the participant's point of view. In a quantitative perspective, student achievement is determined by what are the NAPLAN scores according to states in Australia, or what are the scholastic aptitude test scores if we compare it by races in the United States of America. But for qualitative approaches, we look at the participant's point of view. So we look at the student achievement and how this means from the point of view of students. Or we can describe how the participants, in this case students, value the importance of student achievement. Right? So these are ways of looking at the same questions, but from a qualitatively philosophical perspective. Continuing the discussion on the historical trends of qualitative procedural developments, we see that the central phenomenon, this idea of a central phenomenon, emerged as the most important engine of quantitative questioning, as opposed to research questions or hypotheses. And then methods such as observations and interviews went to the fore of qualitative research, and design such as case studies, grounded theory, and narrative inquiries took over as the historical approaches in undertaking qualitative research. If we take a look at the focal question, when we ask ourselves, how do different actors in school define student achievement, is a way of rephrasing, again, that focal question from a qualitative perspective by looking at ways that stakeholders define student achievement. Or we can ask the question, what issues and challenges do school actors face in dealing with student achievement? The historic trends of quantitative research can also be attributed to advocacy practices. In this regard, the qualitative researcher is not an objective, politically neutral observer. Usually they're not, if you take a look at qualitative research. And the qualitative researcher is an observer of the human condition. And usually what happens is that the meaning of the research becomes plural. It's political and open. And the project is collaborative and participatory. Looking at the focal point again, the questions that arise, if we take a look at it from a qualitative perspective, would be, what is the impact of the demands of student achievement on teaching practice? Right? And we can also ask the question, what is the impact of the demands of student achievement on school management? Now, these two questions manifest the plurality of the phenomenon, of the central phenomenon, because student achievement can be seen from the perspective of teachers and also from the perspectives of school management. And it is also political, because what may happen is that how student achievement is viewed by teachers may be really diametrically opposed as to how school management sees it. These are some things that happen in qualitative research. Why do research? These were some of the questions that we looked at when we looked at the initial session. Research helps you comprehend real-world puzzles. So let's take a look at how we comprehend real-world puzzles by approaching it in a quantitative way and also in a qualitative way. At the center of this slide, you will see the steps in the research process: identifying a problem, reviewing the literature, specifying a purpose, collecting data, analyzing, and eventually reporting and evaluating the data, the results. And on the left-hand side of the slide, you will see quantitative characteristics. And on the right-hand side, you see qualitative characteristics. So in this particular slide, you see that the steps in the research process, from the first identification of a problem all the way to reporting and evaluation, can actually be looked at from quantitative characteristics and also from qualitative characteristics. Let me focus on the quantitative characteristics. You see that in identifying a problem, it's descriptive, it's explanatory. The review of the literature plays a major role because it justifies a problem. Specifying a purpose for quantitative studies is specific and narrow, and usually it needs to be measurable and observable. Collecting data, there is a preponderance of using predetermined instruments. Numeric data is collected, and there's usually large numbers that are collected. Analyzing and interpreting data for quantitative approaches, it's statistical analysis, which essentially entails description of trends, comparisons and predictions, cause and effect. And when you talk about reporting and evaluation, it's standard and fixed. There are conventions that are followed, and it's usually objective and unbiased. For qualitative characteristics, on the other hand, it's when we take a look at the problem identification, it's exploratory. The purpose is to understand a central phenomena. The literature review does not play that much of a big role, it plays a minor role. It can also be used to justify a problem. Specifying a purpose, it's general and broad, and we value the participant's experience in a qualitative approach. Collecting data, it's general. Emerging form, text or image data is the basic unit of analysis that is used, and usually you have small numbers in qualitative characteristics. In analysis and interpretation, there's text analysis. Descriptions and themes form a large part of the analysis and interpretation of qualitative data. There are larger meanings derived from findings, and reporting and evaluating, it's flexible, it's emerging, it's reflexive, and in that sense, it could also be seen as biased. Ways in which quantitative and qualitative research are similar, they both follow the steps in the process of research. The format for reporting is the same, and both have data collection steps. Now let's relate research designs to quantitative and qualitative research and steps in the research process. Again, in this slide, you see on the left-hand side, there are steps in the research process. On the center column, you will see two approaches, and then on the final column, the third one on the right-hand side, are some research designs. So when you take a look at collecting data from a quantitative aspect, it's usually the research designs that are employed are experimental or correlational designs or even survey designs. If you take a look at quantitative, qualitative, then you can find mixed methods research designs or even action research. And if you trace the red line there on the slide, qualitative data collection, qualitative analysis and interpreting data, and qualitative reporting and evaluating. In evaluation, they basically fall under research designs in the qualitative realm: ethnography, grounded theory, and narrative inquiries. We'll talk about this a bit more. Quantitative designs and uses. So you have two big differences. One would be intervention research. That's when a researcher explains whether an intervention influences an outcome for one group as opposed to another group. And then you have the non-intervention research, associating or relating variables in a predictable pattern for one group of individuals and describing trends for the population of the people. So intervention research is also called experimental research. Non-intervention research is also called correlational research or survey research. Some examples: teacher factors determining student achievement. An intervention is made, a teacher factor intervention is made, and then results try to determine whether these teacher factors affected student achievement. There is no intervention made, so you basically, on the one hand, compare school type with student achievement and see whether there are relationships that occur. Again, there is no intervention made. Survey research, you essentially take a look at student achievement and differentiate these according to, for example, races. Now, what are qualitative designs and uses? So you have ethnographic research, which essentially explores the shared culture of a group. You have grounded theory research that explores common experiences of individuals to develop a theory. And then narrative research, where you explore individual stories to describe the lives of people. What are some examples? When you take a look at student achievement and its impact on teachers' practices, you're looking at the shared culture of teachers. This could be considered an ethnographic type of research. Student achievement and what this means to students. Essentially, you're exploring common experiences of individuals who develop some sort of a theory from the ground up. So this could qualify as a grounded theory research. And then when you ask school actors to define student achievement by collecting their stories and then restoring them to arrive at insightful comments and suggestions and findings, then you're actually in the area of narrative research. Of course, you have combined designs and uses, which are there are two main. One would be mixed methods research, where you combine quantitative and qualitative data to understand and explain a research problem better. And then you have action research. using qualitative or quantitative data for individuals to study problems that they face in their setting. The main difference, mind you, is that in action research, you're solving a problem. It's very practice-based, it's context-based, it's solving a problem. For mixed methods, it may solve a problem or it may not. So there's no preoccupation for mixed methods research to actually solve a problem. An example of this could be student achievement and its impact on teachers' practices. So a quantitative aspect would be to survey teachers' responses, what they think is their influence on student achievement. And then the qualitative approach could be undertaking focus group discussions of selected teachers to try to find out the impact of this idea of student achievement to how teachers practice their craft. We can also look at the same phenomena, student achievement impact on teachers' practices, but for action research, what happens here is that communities of practice initiate a quick survey on the usefulness of a community of practice in trying to solve problems in school. And then the quantitative bit would be interviews with selected teachers to try to see how useful the community of practice approach, COP approach, is in trying to solve this quandary of what is the impact of the idea of student achievement on teachers' practices. Choosing whether to use a quantitative or qualitative approach. You need to match the approach to the problem that you're investigating, fit the approach to your audience, relate the approach to your experiences. Now, this particular graphic shows us the complete picture of quantitative research. So we begin at this side here. So we see the question, can the independent variable be manipulated? If it can be manipulated, yes, it goes in this particular quadrant. This is called experimentals or the intervention type of research. If the independent variable cannot be manipulated, no, then you'll go here to the non-experimental approaches or the non-intervention research. An example here is how does ICT innovation affect student achievement? This could be my research question. And the question here that I ask is which one is actually the independent variable here? Is it ICT innovation or is it student achievement? I hope that you answered that the independent variable is ICT innovation, right? The dependent variable, what we're trying to determine is student achievement. So if I can manipulate the IV, the independent variable, it's an experimental study. If there's this intervention, then I could ask the question, what is the impact of, let's say, this particular innovation in Singapore is called Lead at ICT Schools. What is the impact of this project to student achievement? So there's an intervention. They're using ICT schools at ICT in several lead schools, and I want to determine the impact of this. Can the manipulation be done randomly? If it can be done randomly, then we are looking at what is referred to as true experiments. And an example of that would be comparing student outcomes in one lead at ICT school, applying classical pre-test, post-test design on a random selection of students. So it's classical pre-test and post-test design. There's some misspelling here. Right? If the manipulation cannot be done randomly, no, then what can happen is that the independent variable can be randomly measured. And in this case, we're looking at quasi-experimental designs. So the difference here is that the true experiment, the independent variable can be manipulated, and this manipulation can be done randomly. So you have a true experiment. But if the independent can be manipulated, but it cannot be randomly measured, then you're actually looking at a quasi-experimental design. Non-equivalent control group design with pre- and post-tests, matching lead at ICT schools with similar non-lead at ICT schools, and comparing student outcomes after innovation. Let me clarify this. So here, in this true experiment, I am looking at one school, and I'm able to manipulate the independent variable. I'm able to manipulate whether ICT innovation can be implemented or not. And then in this particular school, I can actually randomly select my respondents. Part of the population of the school would be exposed to the intervention, to the ICT innovation, and another part will be won't be exposed to the ICT innovation. And then what I do is I do a pretest, classical pretest. The intervention is applied to only one group, which was randomly chosen. And then after that, I do a post test and compare the results to the randomly selected group that was exposed to the intervention, the ICT innovation, and to another group that was not exposed to the ICT innovation. And then I compare the post test results. This is a true experiment. Quasi-experimental design says that I cannot independently, I cannot randomly measure it. So what I do is I have a non-equivalent control group design with pre and post test. I still have a pre and post test, but what I did was I got one lead at ICT school, and then I compared it with another school which does not apply the lead at ICT innovation, but they're very similar. But this is the best that I can do. So that's why it's referred to as a quasi-experimental design, right? And usually for people who undertake experimental or intervention studies in social sciences, it will be very difficult to actually achieve an experiment, a true experiment. Most of the time it will be quasi-experimental designs, right? If we go back here, if the independent variable cannot be manipulated, then we're looking at non-experimental studies. So for example, we can just compare student achievement between selected schools. One type of schools will be lead at ICT, and another type of school will be the regular schools. They're non-lead at ICT. If the independent variable is categorical, then you do what is called a causal comparative design. If the independent variable is continuous, then you do a correlational design, right? Is there a relationship between lead at ICT schools funding? So funding is a continuous variable, and for this particular instance, this is because it's a Singapore context, the PSLE, or the primary school leaving examination, is a continuous variable. Yeah, so the values within the continuous variable really make sense. The differences are real, right? But if the variables are categorical, then I can do a causal comparative design. Is there a relationship between lead at ICT school membership and PSLE aggregate T-score? So here I have categorical variables. So is a school a member of a lead at ICT school? Yes. If it's not, then that's a no. So that's a categorical way of describing a variable, right? And then when I take a look at aggregate T-scores, what I have done is I've treated the PSLE scores into categories. So an aggregate category could be low scores. Another aggregate category will be middle scores. Another category will be high scores. So instead of treating the variable continuously, for example, I could say 50 upon 100, which is a continuous variable, I can say that the PSLE aggregate T-scores is level 2 because it's 50 upon 100, right? As opposed to treating it in a continuous way, right? So this particular graphic shows us how quantitative research approaches begin with the independent variable and then end up with research designs on this end. Now, qualitative research is entirely different. You see here that phenomenology is right at the center, and then it overlaps with ethnography, narrative inquiry, grounded theory, and case study research overlaps all of them. Let's take a look at examples of this. So, when you explore the lived experience of individuals to develop meaning, structure, and essence, we can call it a phenomenological approach. And an example of this could be, how do beginning teachers make sense of their lived experience of, for example, the notion of service learning? Ethnography is exploring the shared culture of a group. So you could actually, for example, take a look at the question, what are beginning teachers' shared notions of service learning? You're taking a look at the shared culture of a particular group. If you explore the individual stories to describe the lives of people, this is narrative inquiry. How do school actors and stakeholders narrate or tell the stories of their service learning? If you take a look at common experiences of individuals to develop a theory, for example, exploring the question, what does service learning mean to students? How helpful is this meaning to theories of student engagement? We're actually delving into the territory of grounded theory approaches. and exploring and arriving at a detailed account and analysis of a case. A case here is a bounded system, time, space. And how do individuals develop meaning, structure, and essence? You're actually looking at a case study research. An example of this in a question would be, what are the detailed contextual analyses that emerge in studying the specific phenomenon of service learning as seen by beginning teachers? Mixed methods follow a triangulation design. So the researcher gives priority to both quantitative, uppercase quan, and qualitative, uppercase qual. Researcher collects both quantitative and qualitative data concurrently, and then the researcher compares the results from the quantitative and qualitative analysis to determine if the two databases yield similar or dissimilar results. Triangulation design. Another one is the explanatory design. Researcher places priority on quantitative, uppercase quan, data collection and analysis. Researcher collects quantitative data first in the sequence, and then researcher uses the qualitative data to explain results of the quantitative data. And the other approach in mixed methods is exploratory design. Research emphasizes qualitative, uppercase qual data rather than quantitative, lowercase quan data. Researcher has a sequence of data collection that involves collecting qualitative data first, followed by quantitative data. The researcher plans on the quantitative data to build on or explain the initial qualitative findings. This is the same description of the three slides in graphic form. Roman numeral 1 is triangulation, mixed methods, so the interpretation happens at the same time for quant and qualitative approaches. Roman numeral 2 is explanatory mixed methods. You begin with the quantitative data and results, and then it's followed up by qualitative data and results. And then you have Roman numeral 3, exploratory mixed methods design. You start with qualitative data and results, and then you build on these findings and validate through quantitative data and results. For individual work, I'm actually suggesting that you take a look at these questions by looking at this particular article. Identify main problem, identify sources of literature, what are the main findings, how did the author try to resolve the main problem. Personal reflection in relation to your assignment, comment on the research perspectives offered by quantitative and qualitative research. Focus on the following sub-questions. And this is the end of this session on types of research methods. If you have any further questions or clarifications, please do not hesitate to get in touch with me through the email that you find on the screen. Thank you.